I bought this at a fucking yard sale. I'm just trying to watch The Mask by Jim Carrey. I get this fucking bullshit. What the fuck is that?
Just as entropy takes time to gradually accumulate, a step at a time, so does solution. Just as much as the dirt and all the items in a given environment slowly accumulates one at a time without you really noticing that cluster, until it seems as though you blinked your eyes and you opened it just to realize, my goodness, this needs to be cleaned up. And then you take one item at a time and place it where it's supposed to be. That's exactly how the solution to life comes. Part of that solution is embedded into the invisible strings that connects humans' affairs. The invisible strings of humans' affairs has been made deliberately complex in a manner that shuts the brain down and causes people to just ignore it the moment they begin to look into it, such as legalese. The invisible strings that affects humans' affairs are deliberately turned into legalese for the purpose of the mind simply giving up. All it has to do is take it one at a time in order to arrange its clusters. In the case that most people do not have the time to arrange those clusters one at a time, videos like these exist to provide clarity to the everyday man as to the invisible strings that affects them that others have made into a career based on their confidence in your incompetence, because most people have so much going on in their lives that they can't stop to read these things. If they do, problem solving of taking one thing at a time, stopping and thinking about it, is almost impossible. Because the thing with the human mind is, the reality of it is, it can only deal with one thing at a time. No matter how much of an intelligence quota you might have, no matter how much of an emotional quota or spiritual quota you have, human mind can only recruit faculty of memory, reasoning, emotion, and intuition, and put it to use one at a time when it comes to problem solving. The subconscious mind at all times can do all of that at once, easily. But the thing with the conscious mind is, in its nature, it is a filter. It filters one drop at a time. On the matter of administrative and government law, which affects the everyday man whose lives are being administered through legislatures created by body politics that refer to themselves as the government. The question here is, can you appeal a state Supreme Court decision? This question arose from a recent conversation that I just had today, and we broke it down in its most minute form. That's not the first time I received such a question. And for future reference, or for the benefit of others, enters this video here. We all know that most courthouses have a trial stage, then the appeal decision to that trial stage, then the Supreme Court. In the county or state courts, they usually use arbitration these days to similarly act as trial to come to a conclusion. Other jurisdictions call it mediation. We've made prior videos on the similarities and difference between arbitration and mediation. So, assuming a trial state decision did not go the way you fully desire for it to, whether it partially benefits you or otherwise. So you move it to an appeal level. Then you take that appeal level after getting what you want there that's not so complete, and you take it to the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, all this is taking place on a, quote, state court level. The Supreme Court to that state, let's say, for instance, Maine, has its own Supreme Court. So this is the instance we're speaking of here. That Supreme Court at Maine is the highest court in that state. Question now is, can you take that state Supreme Court, which is the highest decision in that state, can you take that state Supreme Court decision to a federal level? The short answer to it before we start reading the black and white is yes, under the simple condition that you evoke federal law and federal issues during the trial stages, which was subsequently appealed and then taken to the Supreme Court. The state constitution is very important, but I'm not sure if you notice, in most videos I go to the federal version because I implore you directly and indirectly to use both state and federal constitutions. Evoke both in any matter that you have going on. Because if the state Supreme Court, which is the limit and confines of the stepping stone to be taken one at a time, if that state Supreme Court, the highest decision in that state, does not do what you want, given that you've prior evoked federal question or constitutional matters on a federal level, you can now take that state Supreme Court decision to a federal level through something called a certiorari for the federal court to determine that same issue, but from the perspective of federal constitution, which can then override the state decision or independently determine a contrary decision strictly by looking at the federal constitution rather than the state constitution in the same event that gave rise to what you considered as unfavorable at the state Supreme Court. That's the short summary of it. Now, there are nuances to it for it to make sense and for it to work the way you want it to work. Those nuances that makes it work is what we will now read beyond the summary that I've just provided you. Can you appeal a state Supreme Court decision? Understand the limited authority of the U.S. Supreme Court to hear cases from a state's highest court and the specific legal grounds required for review. Whenever a Supreme Court on the federal level through certiorari hears a case, they call it a review. There are different standards of review, by the way, just as a side note. Hopefully we can go over that in other videos. Published July 6, 2025. For most legal matters, a decision from a state's Supreme Court represents the final word. This court is the highest judicial body within the state legal system. That is the state Supreme Court for the state. And its rulings are binding on all other state courts, meaning it preempts the decisions of other state courts so long as the Supreme Court of one state made that decision. Once this court has spoken, the Supreme Court of the state that is, the case is typically over. Keyword being typically. How do you make it not so typical so that it is not over? That's what we're going to speak about. Once this court is spoken, once the Supreme Court of the state has spoken, the case is typically over. However, a narrow path exists to appeal a decision rendered by a state's highest court. In other words, a narrow path exists to undo or expound or to reevaluate the decision of a state Supreme Court. This avenue, aka this loophole or this narrow path, this avenue is an exceptional procedure reserved for a distinct category of legal disputes. What is that distinct category of legal disputes? That's what is entailed in this article. The U.S. Supreme Court's appellate jurisdiction. So now they're going to entertain the U.S. Supreme Court appellate jurisdiction. Now, after speaking about the state Supreme Court, the only judicial body with the authority to review a decision from state Supreme Court is the Supreme Court of the United States. This power is rooted in the structure of the American legal system, which operates under a principle of federalism. So, what is federalism? For you to be able to take a decision from the highest court in the state level to the federal level to redetermine it or expound upon it using a very specific loophole, what even allows that federal level to re-entertain a state's highest judicial power? What opens that door? There's a doctrine called federalism. Federalism creates a dual system of government. In other words, when you start hearing this phrase or combination of words that put system and government together, you're looking at power disputes or the delegation of power. Who has a bigger dick? Who can piss the furthest? That's the short end of it. The legal term or the way to say it so you sound appropriate, it's called system of government. In lay terms, in reality, it is who can bark the loudest and who can swing their dick around. That's the simplest way to put it. Federalism creates a dual system of government, dividing powers between the federal government and the individual state government. Keep in mind that the quote, individual state governments are sovereign to their own, meaning they can create their own roads, they can create their own legislatures, they can have their own treasury, their own treasurers, they can designate and elect their own governors, so and so, absent of waiting for a federal jurisdiction to give them a go, even though we know there are contracting parties between the state and federal, and that church and state are not separate.
Lighting a damn cross in your own yard? Oh, see, that's not a cross. That's a T for tolerance. It's a T for truth. It's a T for turning the corner. That's a T. That's a T for team, because I understand it now. Now we're all on a team. You're my teammate. All right, hey.
Federalism creates a dual system of government, dividing powers between the federal government and the individual state governments. Each, meaning the state and the federal, has its own court system, which was mentioned earlier when it comes to state courts: trial stage, appellate stage, Supreme Court stage on a state level. Same applies on a federal level, where they have their trial stage, usually they call it district courts, then appellate stage and Supreme Court. Some state courts call their trial state districts also. Other state courts don't. They just call it so-and-so division, criminal division, civil division, comma, so-and-so county. That's the state court right there. Other, quote, state courts just call theirs so-and-so district, and they leave it as such. Whereas on a federal level, they call it Eastern. Hey, I'm inviting you to come join the patron page. Not only do you get access to documents, posts, and videos that you will never find on any other platforms, you also get instant access to webinars that otherwise will cost far more. And we speak of things that usually we would not be able to speak of on any other platforms far more freely. On top of that, you get the opportunity to send me monthly questions.